6 hours after placing a folded flag into a grieving mother's hands, Colonel Marcus Ojo stood in handcuffs outside the base he had commanded for 4 years. "Sir, I need you to stop talking and turn around," Specialist Ryan Anderson said, his voice pitched too loud for the empty checkpoint, too tight for a routine stop. Rain ran off the brim of his cap in a steady line, and his hand hadn't left the radio clipped to his vest since the moment Ojo's ID failed to scan. Ojo turned around. He didn't argue. He set his jaw, laced his fingers together the way he'd once taught Privatus half his age to do at this exact gate, and let a specialist 3 ranks his junior press his forearms flat against the guard booth counter. Anderson had been on post 6 days. He'd come off a transfer from a training battalion 2 states away, where the closest he'd gotten to a colonel was a photograph on a hallway wall, and he hadn't yet sat through the welcome brief that would have put a name to this particular face. A staffing gap on nights had left him the only guard physically posted at Gate 4 that shift, his supervisor covering 2 checkpoints at once, reachable by radio but nowhere close enough to glance at the man in cuffs and settle the question in half a second. "My ID is in my wallet," Ojo said evenly. "It's wet. The chip may not be reading. If you'll let me," I said. "Turn around, sir." "I'm not going to say it again." Water had gotten into the wallet somewhere between the cemetery and the 6-block walk back to base. He'd sent his driver home once the service ended, wanting the walk, wanting a few minutes alone before he had to be a colonel again, soaking through denim, through leather, until the laminate on his military ID had gone soft and cloudy at the corner. Anderson had scanned it twice, but twice the reader chirped red. On a normal night, a supervisor standing an arm's length away would have glanced at the man's face, recognized a full-bird colonel standing dead center of his own installation, and waved him through with an apology for the machine. Tonight, that wasn't an option. There was a bulletin, Anderson said, more to himself than to Ojo, tightening the second cuff. "Contractor impersonating an officer. Forged ID, civilian clothes, tries to walk on during shift change, when it's raining and nobody wants to double-check anything." Before we see whether Anderson realizes who is actually handcuffed, take a second to like the video, subscribe if you enjoy stories where the truth always comes out in the end, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if a military ID failed to scan at a secure checkpoint? Would you trust the person standing in front of you or follow procedure no matter who they claimed to be? "I'm not a contractor." Anderson didn't answer that. He was still looking at the wallet, not the man. Ojo felt the cuffs bite into wrists that had carried a grieving family's final memory all afternoon. He said nothing else for a moment. Not because he had nothing to say, 26 years of service had given him plenty, but because he recognized, with the flat clarity of a man who has stood in worse rain than this, that nothing he said in the next 30 seconds would matter as much as what Anderson chose to do next. "Specialist." Ojo kept his voice level. "Look at the photo again, then look at me." Anderson didn't look. He'd already decided what he was looking at. A soaked, unshaven man in a mud-streaked leather jacket. No rank, no orders, no vehicle, standing at a restricted gate, an hour past dark, with a badge that wouldn't read. Every fact fit the bulletin. None of the facts fit the man. "That's what the last guy said too," Anderson muttered, more to the bulletin taped inside his booth than to Ojo. He straightened, tried again, formal this time. "Sir, until I can confirm your credentials, you're being detained. That's procedure." Behind him, the guard tower light swept once across the wet asphalt, and for a moment it lit Ojo's face fully, the deep lines at his eyes, the grey threading through a beard he hadn't trimmed in a week. The particular stillness of a man holding something back that had nothing to do with the handcuffs. He was thinking about a mother in Fayetteville who had asked him, an hour ago, to make sure her son's name was spelled right on the paperwork. He was thinking that he had turned his phone off for the drive back, out of respect, and that it was still off now. He was thinking that nobody on this base currently knew where their commanding officer was. "Specialist Anderson," Ojo said quietly, reading the name off the young man's chest for the first time. I need you to radio your NCOIC before you do anything else. Not after. Before. Anderson's hand was already moving to his radio, but not for that. He kneeled in the wet gravel, keyed the mic, and said the two words that would end his career before either of them understood it yet. Gate 4, this is Anderson. It was the installation's own designation, printed on a laminated card, taped inside every gate booth on post. Nowhere else, no other base, for exactly the scenario the bulletin had described. Possible credential impersonation, subject detained, requesting immediate. He never finished the sentence. He didn't need to. The code itself was the trigger, a request that armed the system automatically, sealing the gate pending confirmation from command. Whether or not the specialist had said the words understood what he'd just set in motion. Somewhere beneath the checkpoint, a low mechanical groan rose out of the concrete, a sound like the base itself clearing its throat. The floodlights along the perimeter fence snapped from standby to full light in a single blinding pulse. And the massive steel barrier gate, the one that hadn't moved since the last live fire drill 8 months ago, began, slowly, deliberately, to close. Anderson froze with the radio still in his hand. He had said the words. He hadn't meant to trigger anything more than a records check. The gate didn't care what he'd meant. The delta barriers rose out of the asphalt in a single synchronized motion, steel plates locking into place with a sound like a door slamming somewhere underground. Anderson stumbled back a step, radio still raised halfway to his mouth, watching floodlights sweep the perimeter road in patterns he recognized from a training video he'd watched exactly once, 6 days ago, and had not expected to see live. He had wanted a supervisor's attention. He had gotten the entire installations. Gate 4, this is Watch Command. Confirm Ho Delta request. Say again your last transmission. The voice on the radio was flat, procedural, already moving faster than Anderson could think. I confirm, Anderson said. Subject detained, credentials won't verify, requesting, copy, initiating lockdown protocol. QRF is rolling. Do not release the subject. Do not approach the perimeter fence line. Stand by. Ojo, still cuffed, still soaked, watched the response unfold with the particular calm of a man who had written the protocol himself 18 months ago. Back when a contractor's badge had gotten through a different gate on a different night, and he'd decided the base needed something faster than a phone call. He had not imagined being on the wrong side of it. 2 Humvees came down the perimeter road inside 4 minutes. Not fast enough to be theatrical, not slow enough to be careless. 6 soldiers moved out in a loose cordon around the checkpoint, weapons slung rather than raised, the posture of people executing a rehearsed procedure rather than reacting to a crisis. At the center of it, moving with the unhurried authority of someone who had run this exact response a dozen times in drills, was Staff Sergeant Denise Whitfield. She took one look past Anderson's shoulder and stopped walking. Specialist, she said. Who is that? Possible impersonator, Sergeant. ID wouldn't scan. No vehicle. Subject was Anderson. Whitfield's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. That's the Colonel. For a moment, nobody moved. Anderson looked at Ojo the way a man looks at a math problem he's certain he solved correctly, right up until someone shows him the answer key. I need his ID to scan before I can. I've stood post under that man for 2 years. I don't need a scanner. Whitfield didn't reach for her radio yet. That hesitation mattered more than she realized. A fellow NCO's judgment call, even a wrong one, wasn't something you undercut in front of 6 soldiers without being certain. Sir, she said instead, turning to Ojo, are you injured? I'm fine, Sergeant. Ojo's voice was even. Uncuff me. Whitfield's hand went to the radio clipped at her chest, then stopped. She looked at Anderson, then at the cuffs, then at the growing knot of soldiers who'd begun to understand exactly what they were looking at. Sir, I can't release you on my own authority. Not once Code Delta's active. It has to close out through Watch Command, same as it opened. She said it like an apology, because it was one. That's not me not believing you. That's the system. doing exactly what you designed it to do. It was, Ojo realized, the correct answer. He built the protocol to survive exactly this kind of moment, to keep a nervous junior soldier's mistake from becoming a bigger mistake made by someone trying to fix it too fast. He had simply never expected to be the one standing inside his own safeguard, wrists raw, waiting for a system to catch up to a truth 6 people already knew. Then, close it out, Ojo said. Whitfield keyed her radio. Watch command, Gate 4, be advised, subject is confirmed. Repeat, subject is confirmed as Colonel Ojo, installation commander, static. Then a pause, too long to be procedural. Copy, Gate 4. Understood. Hold position. The OIC is being notified and is en route. Do not release restraints until confirmation comes through the chain. Anderson's face went the color of the rain. Confirmation from Sergeant. If he's already confirmed, why can't I just... Because you're the one who called it in, Whitfield said, quiet enough that only he heard it. And now it isn't yours to close. Behind them, one of the younger privates had already pulled out a phone, not to film, but to text someone. You will not believe who's cuffed at Gate 4. A message that would reach 3 separate group chats before the OIC's vehicle had even cleared the far checkpoint. Whitfield saw it and said nothing. Some things, once true, couldn't be contained by rank. Ojo stood in the floodlights, hands still bound behind him, and watched the road for headlights. They came a minute later, a single set, moving faster than regulation allowed on a wet perimeter road, cutting through the rain toward Gate 4. Every soldier at the checkpoint turned toward them at once. Whoever was behind that windshield wasn't just arriving to clear a checkpoint. They were about to decide what this incident became. Nobody saluted, not yet. Nobody yet knew who was behind the wheel, or whether the person arriving had come to end this or make it worse. But before we find out who just arrived at Gate 4 and whether this mistake can still be undone, take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. What do you think should happen to Specialist Anderson after everything that's happened so far? Major Elena Reyes had been in her office reviewing a supply audit when Watch Command's transmission came through, and she'd left the building still holding the folder. Because some part of her mind that had run this job for 6 years already understood the words installation commander and detained did not belong in the same sentence without her presence. She parked at an angle that would have earned a private a citation and was out of the vehicle before the engine finished its last turn. Sergeant Whitfield. Reyes took in the scene in under 2 seconds. The barriers, the floodlights, the cuffs, a specialist standing rigid enough to be at attention without having been told to. Status. Ma'am, subject is confirmed as Colonel Ojo. Confirmed personally by me, confirmed by 4 other soldiers on scene. Specialist Anderson initiated Code Delta prior to confirmation. Whitfield kept her voice flat, factual, the tone of someone who had already decided this report would contain nothing she couldn't defend later. Reyes didn't ask Anderson anything yet. She walked to Ojo first. Sir. No salute. Her hands weren't free to render one and hold the folder, and in the moment it didn't matter. I apologize for the delay. Turn, please. The cuffs came off in 4 seconds. Ojo brought his arms forward slowly, the way a man does when circulation has been cut off longer than he's willing to mention, and said nothing about his wrists. Thank you, Major. Reyes looked at the mud on his boots, the dried grey smear of cemetery ground he hadn't had a chance to clean, and something in her expression shifted, not surprise, recognition. You were at Corporal Reyes's service. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly at her own name spoken aloud in that context. The resemblance wasn't coincidence, but she didn't explain it, and Ojo didn't ask. I had a staff meeting. I couldn't attend. His mother asked good questions. Ojo said. I stayed to answer them. It was the only thing he said about the last 6 hours, and it was enough. Reyes turned to Anderson. Specialist, walk me through your decision, in order, starting with what the bulletin actually said. Anderson had rehearsed this moment in his head twice already, standing in the floodlights, and both versions had sounded more reasonable than what came out now. Ma'am, there was a credential impersonation advisory. Subject's ID failed to scan twice. No vehicle, civilian clothing, approaching on foot, after dark. It matched the pattern in the bulletin. Did the bulletin include a photograph of the suspect? Yes, ma'am. Did you compare it to the man in front of you? A pause. Not directly, ma'am. The pattern matched close enough that You matched a profile instead of a face. Reyes said it without heat, which was worse than if she'd raised her voice. Specialist, did you check the duty roster for command staff movements before initiating restraint? No, man. I wasn't aware that was... It's sitting on the counter 6 inches from where you were standing, updated daily for exactly this kind of situation. Reyes wasn't performing for the soldiers now, or West. Maya screamed. Now what was going on? Reyes was cutting a second. She was building something. Methodically. The way she'd build a case file. You had 2 tools available to you tonight. You used neither. Anderson's hand had drifted toward his sidearms holster earlier without him noticing. He noticed now, and moved it away, as if that alone might undo the last 40 minutes. Hand me your weapon and your radio, Reyes said. You're relieved of gate duty effective now, pending review. It wasn't a punishment yet. Both of them understood the difference. This was containment. The same instinct that had made Ojo write Code Delta in the first place, applied now to the soldier who triggered it. Anderson unbuckled the holster with hands that had stopped being steady sometime in the last 2 minutes, and passed it over. Nem, I believed I was following procedure. You were following a bulletin, Reyes said. Procedure would have taken 40 extra seconds, and confirmed you were wrong before anyone got hurt. I want your statement in writing within the hour, while you still remember it exactly as it happened. Not as you'd like it to have happened. She turned back to Ojo. Sir, I'll have this documented as an initial response error, pending full review. I don't have discretion to make it disappear, and I wouldn't if I did. I wouldn't ask you to. Headlights swept the checkpoint again, a second vehicle, moving without the urgency of the first, the deliberate pace of someone who had heard enough of the radio traffic to know there was no longer an emergency, only a situation that needed managing. Reyes glanced toward it, and her expression changed in a way Whitfield noticed, and Ojo did not miss either. That's Battalion, Reyes said quietly, almost to herself. That's Lieutenant Colonel Marsh. Whitfield's eyes flit to Anderson, then back to the approaching vehicle. Everyone at Gate 4 who'd served on this post longer than a week knew Marsh's name. And knew it for a reason that had nothing to do with tonight, and everything to do with what he'd say once he learned whose specialist was standing there with an empty holster. Lieutenant Colonel Marsh didn't get out of his vehicle right away. He sat for a moment with the engine running, the way a man does when he's already decided what he's going to say, and is only waiting for the right expression to say it with. When he finally stepped out, he went to Reyes first, not Ojo, a small thing, but Whitfield noticed it, and so did Ojo. Major, talk to me. Sir, initial response error at Gate 4. Specialist Anderson initiated Code Delta against the installation commander without completing standard verification. I've relieved him of weapon and duty, pending review, and I'm drafting the incident report now. Marsh nodded slowly, the nod of someone absorbing information he intended to reshape before it left the parking lot. Before this becomes a formal review, Colonel, do you have a minute? Ojo did not move toward privacy. Whatever you have to say, Colonel Marsh, you can say here. A small hesitation. Marsh recalibrated. Sir, I've had Anderson under my battalion for 6 days. I knew his father. We served 2 tours together. Good man. And I told him I'd look out for the kid when he got here. I'm not asking you to overlook what happened. I'm asking whether a formal review is really the proportionate response to a soldier who made a bad call under pressure, 6 days into a new post, off a bulletin he was told to take seriously. He detained the installation commander in restraints for over 40 minutes, Ojo said. Formal review is the proportionate response. It's also the standard one. You know that. There's a version of this that ends with counseling and a note in his file, instead of a board looking at his career before it started. Marsh kept his voice reasonable, the voice of a man who genuinely believed he was offering the sensible path, not asking for a favor. I'm not suggesting anything gets buried. I'm suggesting proportion. Proportion, Ojo repeated, and something in the word, said back to him exactly once, made Marsh's jaw tighten. Colonel, if a specialist under your command makes an error like this against a private walking home from his own funeral duty, no rank to fall back on, no sergeant who served under him for 2 years to vouch for his face, what happens to that soldier? Does he get proportion or does he get processed? Marsh didn't answer immediately, and the silence answered for him. I'm not asking you to protect me, Ojo said. I'm asking what happens to the people who don't have someone like you making a phone call on their behalf. Reyes, who had said nothing during the exchange, chose that moment to speak. Sir, for what it's worth, the incident's already logged. Gate camera footage timestamped to stop, the duration, and Specialist Anderson's radio traffic requesting code Delta before verification. It's not something that stays contained to a conversation between the three of us anymore. It exists on a server. Marsh's expression didn't change much, but something behind it did. The recalculation of a man realizing the ground he was standing on had already shifted before he arrived. I understand that, Major. Do you? Ojo said, not unkindly. Or did you drive out here hoping it hadn't? Marsh didn't answer that either. He looked, for the first time since stepping out of his vehicle, less like a battalion commander managing a personnel issue, and more like a man who had made a promise to an old friend and was only now discovering what keeping it might cost him. I'll speak with Anderson, he said finally. That's within my authority, at least. It is, Reyes agreed. His statement isn't, though. That comes to my office. Marsh nodded once and walked toward where Anderson stood, alone now, weaponless, at the edge of the floodlit checkpoint. Whitfield watched him go and didn't move to follow. Question. What none of them could see, from where they stood, was Anderson's phone screen, angled down against his leg, where he'd been rereading the draft of his statement for the last 6 minutes, the one Reyes had asked for within the hour. The one he'd started writing the moment his hands stopped shaking enough to type. He had written it once, truthfully. ID failed scan. Subject did not present rank verbally. I did not check the duty roster before initiating restraint. He read it again now, with Marsh walking toward him, and thought about the version where he had checked the roster, where the scanner had simply malfunctioned twice on a man who'd already identified himself. Where the 40 minutes looked less like a mistake made from ignorance and more like one made from bad luck. It would only take deleting one sentence. His thumb hovered over the screen. Marsh was 10 feet away now, close enough to see the phone but not what was on it. And Anderson made the kind of decision that people only ever recognize as the wrong one after they've already made it. The kind that turns a soldier who'd misjudged a situation into a soldier who'd lied about what he'd done. He deleted the sentence. The discrepancy surfaced 9 days later. During the routine records audit, every Code Delta incident triggers automatically once the case file closes. A clerk pulling the autosave draft history from the incident reporting terminal, the same system Reyes had mentioned to Marsh without a second thought, noticed the final submitted statement didn't match its own 5-minute-old version. One sentence existed in the autosave and not in the copy Reyes had filed. She found Anderson in the barracks day room, off duty, halfway through a meal he didn't finish. She didn't sit down. Your statement says you didn't check the duty roster before initiating restraint. Your draft says the same thing, time-stamped 6 minutes earlier. Then it doesn't say it anymore. Anderson set his fork down carefully, the way a man moves when he's trying not to give anything away and already knows his hands aren't cooperating. Ma'am, I'm not asking if you wrote 2 versions. I have both. I'm asking why. The day room had gone quiet around them. Without anyone announcing it, two soldiers near the vending machine had simply stopped talking. Anderson looked at the table, not at her. I thought, if it read like the scanner just failed on its own, if it didn't look like I'd skipped a step, it wouldn't matter as much. I told myself, it was close enough to what happened that it wasn't really a lie. It's not close enough. It's the difference between an error and a false official statement. And you knew that when you deleted it. Or you wouldn't have deleted it at 6 minutes past, instead of writing it that way the first time. Reyes's voice hadn't risen once. I need you to understand what happens next isn't about the stop anymore. It's about this. He didn't argue. There was nothing left to argue with. The timestamp existed whether he agreed with it or not, and some part of him seemed almost relieved to stop carrying the version he'd invented. I panicked, he said, which was true, and which changed nothing about what the deletion meant under Article 107. What had been a documented error in judgment, the kind that ends in counseling, a note in a personnel file, a lesson learned the hard way at 6 days into a new post, became something the army takes considerably more seriously. A soldier who had altered an official statement, rather than let the truth stand on its own. Reyes forwarded the finding up the chain. The same afternoon she confirmed it. There was no discretion left to reply, and by then, she wasn't looking for any. Marsh was not implicated in the falsification. Anderson had made that decision alone, in the 6 feet of space between a battalion commander's approach and his own conscience. But the timing did not go unnoticed. An officer had walked toward a soldier moments before that soldier destroyed evidence, and even an unrelated coincidence draws scrutiny in a records office already looking for patterns. Marsh spent the better part of a week answering questions about a conversation he hadn't meant to have consequences, and the memorandum that eventually went into his own file noted, plainly, that a battalion commander advocating leniency before a review concludes creates exactly the appearance an investigation exists to prevent. It cost him nothing dramatic. It cost him the kind of trust that doesn't announce itself missing until the next promotion board quietly passes someone over. Anderson's administrative separation proceedings began 5 weeks after Gate 4, longer than any viewer of the story would have wanted, and almost exactly as long as due process actually takes. He didn't fight the discharge once his counsel reviewed what the evidence showed. He'd made one mistake that a system built for exactly that kind of mistake had been prepared to absorb, and one afterward that no system was built to forgive because it had been designed specifically to prevent. Exactly the kind of protection Code Delta itself represented, aimed inward instead of out. Ojo learnt about the separation the same way he learned about most administrative outcomes on his base, a line item in a weekly briefing, delivered without ceremony by Reyes, who had stopped needing to soften anything in her reports to him weeks ago. He didn't ask for detail beyond what the briefing offered. He didn't ask to see Anderson before he left the installation for the last time. There was nothing left he needed to say to a 20-year-old who had already said everything that mattered, badly, on a rainy checkpoint, and then said something worse to himself in the 6 seconds it took to delete a sentence. What he did, 3 weeks after that, was walk out to Gate 4 on a clear afternoon, in uniform this time, on his way to nothing in particular. Whitfield was on duty. She'd been reassigned to gate rotation, as part of a training review Reyes had recommended, and Ojo had approved. New verification protocol, laminated roster updates, a second confirmation step for any detention involving command staff, the kind of policy change that exists because someone lived through the gap it fills. She straightened when she saw him and didn't reach for a formality neither of them needed anymore. Afternoon, Sergeant. Afternoon, sir. A pause, comfortable rather than searching. Perimeter's quiet. He nodded, and for a moment neither of them said anything else, because there wasn't anything left that the silence didn't already cover. Not what had happened, not what it had cost, not what had been fixed because of it. Ojo reached into his jacket and found his wallet, dry now, replaced, The new laminate on his ID still faintly stiff at the corners, the way anything new is before it's been carried long enough to soften. He didn't need to show it to anyone. He carried it anyway, the way a man carries proof he no longer requires but hasn't stopped valuing. He walked past the gate without slowing, into the ordinary rest of an ordinary afternoon, and the barrier behind him stayed exactly where it belonged, open, waiting, ready for whatever came through it next. And built, finally, to know the difference. Have you ever watched someone get the benefit of the doubt withheld from them and wondered what it would take for the system to catch up to the truth? If this story held your attention until the end, consider sharing it with someone who'd appreciate it, and follow along for the next one.